Next, we have Dave Penake. Did I pronounce your name properly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Great. Can you see my screen just to verify?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, really happy to have the chance to speak with you today. You listen to these programs and you see all sorts of great work happening in the mitochondrial space and certainly in different stages of development. We're fortunate enough to be kind of near the end of development, and so we'll talk to you about that today. Let's see here. We've been really busy. We're focused on pyruvate dehydrogenase complex deficiency, or PDCD, which is a mitochondrial rare genetic disorder and obviously ends up being, a chronic deficit of energy production. And so, what we have done to date as we approach our filing for approval is we've finished 2 phase 3 clinical trials. We'll talk to you a little bit about those today. And we're in the process of in the coming weeks, filing for our FDA approval. We've been also making the medicine available under an emergency IND situation. So sometimes we have very severe patients, typically that are neonates, and they need access to something that might be able to help them. Physicians have been requesting access to the product through the FDA, and so we've been supporting those when we've been able to do so. These are very severe situations, and we're doing what we can to help. We've had a number of meetings with the FDA. To give you a sense, we've had 7 meetings in the last 15 months with the agency, trying to make sure that we're in alignment with them as we prepare for this filing. And so we expect, over the coming weeks, as I mentioned, to get that in. And so, we have a lot of people to thank. I think the first person that we'd like to thank is Dr. Stackpool. He's a physician at the University of Florida who's been researching dichloroacetate for a very long time, and has researched that in a number of different disease states. And it looks like PDCD is potentially going to be the one that is the first to achieve FDA approval, and then maybe there will be more to do after that. We'd like to continue to do further research, and then he has brought along with him a team of investigators who have been working with us. Without the investigators, we wouldn't be able to treat patients, and without them, we wouldn't be able to enroll this clinical study. So we have a lot of people to thank, and we feel very fortunate to get to the point where we can put forth our package and have it evaluated by the agency. So PDCD is a disease that affects about 2,000 people in the United States. There are about 1,000 of those patients are diagnosed. Typically, they are, the 2 primary areas where you see this are, patients very early in life, before the age of 1, but typically much earlier, have severe symptoms. Those patients are more likely to be diagnosed. Then you have patients that typically between the ages of 1 and 4 start to show symptoms. Those patients often get diagnosed in a longer period of time, but a lot of them actually are never diagnosed and maybe identified as potentially having cerebral palsy, a variety of different other comorbidities and other diseases. And so a big part of what we're trying to do is make sure that we bring a medicine, if it's approved, to the people that can be treated who are diagnosed, but also really help the other 1,000 people who are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed to find the right pathway to this medicine. An important piece of this is that this, if it's approved, will be the first and only approved medicine in the space. And so these patients typically are on the ketogenic diet, a Mito cocktail, maybe some vitamins, and the ability to potentially add an approved medication could help a lot of people. So, what we are trying to do is make sure that we work hard to get the medicine approved, make it available to all those that know that they have the disease, and those that don't, try and find ways that we can identify them. And so how does PDCD relate to Leigh syndrome? About 25 to 35% of patients with PDCD actually have Leigh syndrome. And a substantial portion of the patients in our clinical study also were co-diagnosed with Leigh syndrome. And the reason is that the PDCD genetic defects, PDHA1 is the most common of those, overlap with the defects that cause Leigh syndrome. So Leigh syndrome is made of 133 different genetic defects. PDCD is called 6 or 7. And so, we make up a very small portion of the total Leigh syndrome population, but a lot of our patients also have Leigh syndrome. And so, the key things here are the more severe patients and those with earlier onset are typically more likely to have Leigh syndrome than those that have later onset or more mild symptoms. And so, as we approach trying to help identify patients, try and help improve diagnosis rates, as we have a medicine that potentially has the opportunity to be approved, what we've really done is a lot of market research trying to find out if a patient has PDCD, what does their pathway look like, right? Because not everyone has the opportunity of a fully dedicated parent with a physician that's absolutely prepared to try new things and receive it, that may not have seen this diagnosis before, to find that diagnosis and then treat the patient the most appropriate way. Because this is really hard and really confusing. It takes a long time and a lot of energy. And so, how do we find patients and how do we get them there? And so the key things that we're really focused on is, first of all, patients end up in a lot of different places. And so one of the best things that we can do is fix the places that, regardless of who the physician is that's treating the patient, that if they go to these places, they'll find common ground. So we want every genetic screening panel to have the genes for PDCD. So if they're trying to identify something more specific in epilepsy or neurology and they run a genetic screen, we want PDCD to be on that screen. If they're searching for Leigh syndrome, we want PDCD to be on that screen. The other is, and in the state of Ohio, they actually already do this, but there are certain amino acid ratios that you can just calculate based on the data that you get from the newborn screen heel prick blood test. And that actually has a really high selectivity and sensitivity for identifying patients. So we're kind of like, well, everyone is born, so maybe we can do a great job of getting newborn screening so that we identify patients who are likely to have PDCD screened right away, genetically tested and confirmed very close to birth. The second is, eventually many of these patients more and more often are getting genetic screens. So let's make sure all the genetic screening gets there. And so we're putting a big effort towards making sure that happens. Secondary to that, we're going to be reaching out to physicians, trying to educate physician communities, going to conferences, so that if there is suspicion out there, we can try and identify patients who may be diagnosed with something else that have PDCD, to make sure that they, get on the right medicines, a ketogenic diet, and then, if our medicine's approved, our medicine as well. So those are some of the key things that we're doing to try and work and bring this, identify patients so that they can be treated. A little bit about our studies. We ran 2 of them that overlap a little bit. So our first study was really measuring motor function. So, is the patient getting stronger? Do they have hypotonia, hypertonia? What are some other issues that they may have that are neurologically based motor function problems, as well as biomarkers, the key one being lactate. And so we screened a number of patients, eventually enrolled 34. And this was a crossover design study. So patients were, there's a 4-month period at the start where they either received our product or placebo. Then there was a 1-month washout. They switched, they received the other. And then after that, every patient was offered the opportunity to go on open label. We have some patients that are coming close to 4 years on open label at this point in time. And so a few key things about our study. The active drug was dichloroacetate. That drug has a history of some therapy limiting side effects, so specifically peripheral neuropathy, that people thought were dose related side effects. One of the things that Dr. Stackpole and some of his colleagues identified was that it actually wasn't dose related. It was related to the amount of drug that was in the body of these patients, and that was actually related to a different genetic identifier. So that led to patients, either they metabolize it quickly, so maybe you take a dose and it's out of your body quickly. Other people take a dose and it takes a really long time to get out of their body. And so what we actually do is, prospectively, before we give anyone medicine, we identify what their genetic haplotype is as it relates to how quickly they metabolize the drug. Then we set their dose. Okay. And what that's done is it's actually reduced substantially the side effect profile of this medicine. And so we've been really pleased with how that's worked. We're measuring a motor function endpoint, and then we're measuring lactate, among other things, but those are the 2 key ones for us in the first phase 3 study. In the second phase 3 study, we're actually measuring survival. So the key here is that, there's been some really good work done by Dr. Patel and colleagues, as well as Dr. DeBross and her colleagues, on the natural history of patients who have PDCD. And what you find are a few things if you kind of look at the key takeaways. The first is that they all essentially have the same background therapy, which doesn't include any approved drugs. It's typically vitamins and often the ketogenic diet. And they also, unfortunately, have roughly the same mortality rate, which is there are a lot of kids who die really early because of this disease after maybe succumbing to an infection or lactic acidosis or something. And so the mortality rates between these two studies both approached 40%. As we were in our phase 3 program, we reached out to the agency, who's been very helpful. And we said, is there a way that we could compare the survival of our patients, because they'll be on the study a long time, like I said, some have been 4 years, compared with the natural history? And what the agency said is, this is imperfect, but we think there's a good way that you can do this. And there's some other medicines that we've looked at that have been, evaluated this way. And so what they had us do is they had us identify a single patient in our study and match it to a single patient in the DeBross natural history study, based on the patient's gender, their age, and their specific type of PDCD. So in this case, we were focusing on the PDHA1 subtype of PDCD. And then they had us try and match every single one of our patients with as many patients as we could from the natural history. Then after that, they wanted us to assess all sorts of other things, including, where the patient was treated, standard of care, the decade in which they lived, all sorts of things, so that we could say, if it shows that there's actually a benefit of mortality here, and that kids are surviving longer when they're on DCA treatment than when they weren't, is it specifically because of the therapy? Can we rule out all of the other things, advances in standard of care, the ketogenic diet or whatever, in order to identify if the treatment effect is really associated with the medicine? And so we've spent a lot of time working with the agency and a lot of time internally to make sure that we're able to do that. And so we'll be submitting that as the second study that we have for our phase 3. So moving forward, our team is really tired and really energized. These filings are a big deal. They're thousands of pages, and you kind of hang on every single word that you put in, because you don't want any confusion to occur between the reviewer at the agency and the company, because ultimately, if something like that happens and it takes longer than it should, or it leads to an outcome that was an accident, that hurts the community. And so we want to, we take our job very seriously here. And we respect all the people that have helped us get to this point. We're creating infrastructure for an expanded access program. We want to make this medicine available to everyone who wants it to be available to them ahead of approval, that has PDCD and is able to meet the requirements of the study. And so we're working with the agency and then identifying a path forward with that once we file. And then obviously we're partnering. We love the opportunity to speak at events like this, and we'll do everything that we can to make sure that we raise PDCD awareness, really focus on screening programs, so that everywhere where patients will always be, we'd like to find a way to be there as well. And then, obviously anything that we can do to help the community, we're very excited to do, and look forward to the outcomes that we have over the course of the next months and year.
Thank you so much for that and all of your work in this area. There is a question, but we'll answer questions at the end if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Great. Thank you so much.